routine maintenance when a loud aircraft noise causes them to look up. What they see is beyond imagination.
Oh, shit!
The images captured by an amateur cameraman are the first to show the initial plane crash into the World Trade Center's North Tower. It's a terrible confirmation of what we know occurred. Foreknowledge does nothing to diminish the shocking impact. In this most video-aware of countries, the attacks are inevitably filmed from several locations. And so it is that more images of the second attack on the South Tower have emerged.
Don't touch it.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh no! Oh my God!
Each angle compels the mind to overcome a natural sense of disbelief.
Boom!
Oh man, what the fuck's going on?
Wow! Oh shit! Wow! Do you see this aircraft?
However you look at it,
I've got it all.
it's appalling and incomprehensible.
That is it. This is there.
Oh my God!
We now know that as the buildings caught fire, there were several thousand people inside. The sight of survivors signalling for their lives at the windows, some falling to their deaths, was bound to make the emergency services try even more desperately to reach them. But it would cost them their own lives. Hundreds of firefighters, police and medical staff either ran to safety or died along with those they were trying to save. It was as though a volcano had erupted in downtown New York. It's impossible to imagine the scene as rescuers face death themselves, but a paramedic filming as he works gives us a graphic insight.
I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help, because I don't think I'm one of them.
He asks a fireman for a share of his respirator so he can continue.
Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Can I get a toot? I'm just need a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you. This is the car I hid behind. It saved my life.
Yeah, Mike!
Hey.
Mike!
Hey.
Mike, come over here! Yeah!
Anybody need a doctor?
Where are you?
Don't have oxygen. Can you...
Hello, Doc.
Hey, that guy needs some oxygen if someone can share it with him.
10-4.
Thanks.
There are survivors, but in the confusion and choking dust, it's not clear which incident they've survived or where they've emerged from.
I thought we were done. I thought it was over.
I've never seen nothing like it in my life.
And just as the dust is beginning to settle, several hours later comes a third collapse. The Salomon Brothers building, from 47 stories to none. The hijackers' attack on the symbol of American economic dominance had brought even greater destruction than they might have hoped for. How could anyone survive inside this? And where does anyone start to look? With darkness, the searching goes on, but with little hope of finding anyone still alive in the collapsed buildings. Looking at such images, it seems just like piles of rubble. Impossible to relate to the scale of the human loss. Thousands of people gone. Each and every loss is a personal family tragedy. One man, Ronnie Clifford, whose family's from Cork, somehow survived the initial strike on the trade centre where he worked. Only later did he learn that his sister Ruth and her daughter Juliana were on board one of the planes which crashed into the towers, a fact unknown when he first called home.
So he rang me as soon as he got home, quite emotional, very traumatised. But at that point was quite worried about Ruth because he also knew that she was flying out. My niece Juliana was a lovely, beautiful little 4-year-old girl, full of life, and my sister was the bubbliest person in the world. In one sense, we're probably one of the luckier people that we actually have confirmation where other people are missing loved ones and looking for them at this point.
In Pittsburgh, scene of another crashed plane, there are moving accounts from families saying they received calls from loved ones on the aircraft telling them they'd been hijacked and were going to die. The final words of Public Relations Executive Mark Bingham to his family were the same as those of the others.
He just said, I want to let you all know that I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again.
I said that.
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
From the rubble and the ashes, the president and political leaders have been trying to resurrect the American resolve, urging people not to let the perpetrators break their spirit. But whatever the response, it will not bring back the dead. This act cannot be undone. This country will never be the same again.
Lindsay Taylor, as the full horror of yesterday's atrocities are beginning to emerge, so are the stories of those who were caught up in the worst of the carnage. A British lawyer, Mark Oliver, was in his office on the 57th floor of the World Trade Center and felt the impact of the first plane crashing into his tower. A little earlier tonight, I asked him to describe his hour-long escape down the endless stairwells of the skyscraper.
I got into the office early yesterday. Thankfully, my floor was almost completely deserted. There were very few people. I know the time exactly. It was 8:42. I looked at my watch because suddenly the building lurched very violently forward. I mean, I was flung across my desk. I was standing right by the window, and just on the other side of the window was what I now appreciate was what was the remains of the plane. And that was a truly horrific sight of what was falling literally within 3 feet of my face. What was obviously burning fuel, it was alight, chairs, I saw a shoe go past, and there were things that I won't tell you that I realised what they were when they went past. We started to proceed down and immediately began to smell acrid burning smoke. I don't know whether you know the World Trade Center very well, but you have to change elevator banks at floor 44. When we started to cross the elevator bank, there was huge plumes of black smoke billowing out of one of the elevator shafts. And it was at that point I realised quite how much serious danger we were in, because before it was above and we were moving down, but it was obvious that the building now was heavily on fire.
Were there other people joining you from other floors?
Yes, it was, and it was getting increasingly congested, particularly after the 44th floor, because what happened after then was obviously some stairwells were filling with smoke, so people were being diverted onto our stairwell. And I, at that point, lost all of my colleagues. We'd gone down about 5 stories from the 44th floor, when we were suddenly lots of screaming from above us to move to the right and to move into single file, and the burns and the walking wounded walked past us, and people obviously rushing to get them down. They were the priority to get them down, and that continued for the next 10 or 20 stories. People rushing past with burns, fairly bad burns. But about the 20th floor, that was when the first firemen started to go past us up into the building. And we were all thanking them, and they were exhausted by this stage. They'd gone up 20 flights. The stairwell was extremely hot. We were That, John, is the tragedy. More than anything else, in a way, these people were desperately trying to help. They were struggling up that stairwell. They were carrying huge equipment. They were exhausted. We were trying to cheer them on, and they were trying to cheer each other on. I'm aware very much that most of those people are now dead, and they died trying to save mine and other people's lives. There are no words that can ever possibly express their bravery and heroism. It was unbelievable, because they were walking into Armageddon. That building was in such a dreadful state by then. The last 15 stories, there was an awful lot of water flooding down the stairs. It was like a river we were walking through. The bottom of the escalator had collapsed, so there was about a 4-foot jump you had to make. The people were like making this jump over this water-filled area. We were halfway across the plaza. Suddenly, the attitude of the emergency services changed. They suddenly started to yell, "Get out now, run, get out now."
Mark Oliver, survivor from the 57th floor of the World Trade Center, talking to me earlier. Hospitals across New York had been ready to cope with a flood of injured, but it didn't happen. It appears few people actually survived this tragedy. Instead, every morgue on Manhattan was filled and barges ferried body bags across the Hudson River. So far, the New York mayor has confirmed only 41 deaths, but he's predicted the number will run into thousands. Mark Easton reports on a city paralysed and in shock as the desperate search for survivors still goes on.
New York City has pulled up the drawbridge. Every crossing to Manhattan Island is closed. The financial heart of the world's only superpower evacuated. On the streets, 3,000 National Guardsmen have joined the fire crews, paramedics and police in what they're still calling search and rescue, but which is, for the most part, search and recovery.
It's just a horrible sight. It's a horrible day, and I wish everybody well, and we're here to do whatever, as much as we can.
Emergency services have found hundreds of bodies, and chillingly, parts of bodies. The dead are being moved to makeshift morgues. New York's own facilities are already overwhelmed, so some have been taken across the Hudson River on barges loaded with body bags.
The numbers that we're working on are in the thousands. Obviously, we hope that's not the case, but the estimate would be for both of the buildings that although building number 2 had a chance to clear out, a lot of people probably cleared out of building number 2. Building number 1 had some time to clear out, but there were areas of it that were affected. The best estimate that we can make, relying on the Port Authority and just everyone else that has experience with this, is that there'll be a few thousand people left in each building.
Only 9 people have been pulled out of the wreckage alive today. Every 45 minutes, rescuers stop work to listen for any noise or calling from the debris. Some people trapped have used their mobile phones to call for help.
We do believe that there are still people alive in the rubble. There have been some indications of cell phone communications. Late last night, 2 Port Authority police officers were taken from the rubble alive and were saved.
The staff, as unfortunately, was anticipating and hoping that we would receive survivors during the night, and I think everyone was very disappointed that we did not.
With fire crews being moved into Manhattan from across the state, it was reported that the city's own fire department chief and his deputy were among 259 uniformed officers who remain unaccounted for. Dust and ashes. A deathly shroud fell on America's financial center overnight, paper like autumn leaves. New York residents in deep shock sought comfort from one another. Downtown, fire crews and paramedics were working until they dropped, in the most difficult and emotionally harrowing conditions, most too traumatized even to talk about what they'd witnessed. Somewhere within the mountain of twisted metal and masonry, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of bodies. Finding the few who may be clinging on to life was a grim and daunting task. Officers were assigned a 1-meter square area to secure and search. But translating the plans into the chaotic mass before them was virtually impossible. An eerie silence enveloped Lower Manhattan last night broken only by the drone of heavy equipment gently probing at the wreckage. Sniffer dogs could smell no life. The dust blocked all sense. New York's Mayor, Rudy Giuliani, toured the scene in the early hours.
People are doing everything that they can to rescue as many people as possible, and this is going to be a long-term effort. So I just wanted to make sure that everything is here that could be here, and it is. So we just pray to God that we can save a few people.
Today there were fears that a cloud of despair will now descend on New York. 2 24-hour mental health crisis lines have been set up, and officials are so worried about what they call psychological trauma, they're urging New York parents to talk through the tragedy with their children. But the scars will be carved deep into the character of this proud city.